There's a rule in fine dining: become part of the wallpaper. Especially when the men in the private dining room are deciding who bleeds next. But when their sweating interpreter smiled, twisting a brutal ambush into a polite compromise, a simple waitress broke the rule. Mara refilled the wine and murmured, "He's rewriting your words." The private room at Ches Solano smelled of seared duck fat, cigar smoke, and nervous sweat. Mostly the sweat. Mostly the sweat. Mara stood in the corner, a folded linen cloth over her left forearm, her hands clasped behind her back, her feet aching in flats that had stopped being comfortable 4 hours ago. But you don't shift your weight in the private room. You don't cough. You don't breathe too loudly. You are the furniture. You are a ghost who happens to know how to properly decant a 4-figure bottle of Barolo. At the head of the heavy walnut table sat Dominic Vale. He didn't look like the men on the evening news. No flash, no gold. Dominic wore a slate-gray suit cut loose enough under the left arm to hide the shape of a holster. His hair was black, going silver early at the temples, and his face had the stillness of a man who had learned, a long time ago, that stillness kept you alive. Tired eyes. Cold, patient, exhausted, his hands lay flat on the white tablecloth. To his right sat his second, a broad, silent man named Ruiz, who spent the evening glaring at the breadbasket as if it had personally wronged him. Across from them sat the Hungarians. Tomas Kovacs was built like a delivery truck, thinning blonde hair, a face flushed with the ruddy confidence of a man who had never once been told no. He wore a gold watch that caught the chandelier light every time he lifted his fork. 2 men flanked him, both silent, both watchful. And between the 2 sides sat Petra's brother's friend. No. Between the 2 sides sat Andre, the interpreter. Thin, reedy, wire-rimmed glasses, a receding hairline he combed forward and pretended not to notice. He was a bridge over a river that wanted very badly to run red. He'd wiped his upper lip with his napkin 5 times before the appetizers were even cleared. Mara had counted. The stakes were high enough that the kitchen had been whispering about it since 3 in the afternoon. The Vale family controlled the freight moving through the eastern rail yards. The Hungarians wanted in. If the deal held, someone would order champagne. If it didn't, the maitre d' had already told Mara, quietly, to be ready to leave the room and lock the doors from the outside. "Water for the gentleman," the maitre d' murmured into her earpiece. She peeled off the wall, lifted the silver pitcher, and moved toward Kovacs first. As she poured, he didn't look at her. He was speaking low and fast to his men in Hungarian, tearing a piece of bread in half without looking at it. "These Americans are soft. He thinks he's the one holding the leash. Let him believe it a little longer, not a flicker." Her mother had come over from Budapest in the 90s, and Mara had grown up with the language in the kitchen the way other kids grew up with cartoons, half absorbed, half forgotten, until 3 years of grad school in Vienna dragged it back to the surface, sharp as ever. She knew the tone of a man laying a trap the way she knew the weight of a full tray. She moved to Andre and filled his glass. His pen hovered, trembling, over a small notepad. Dominic leaned forward, his voice a low rumble under the quiet piano coming through the ceiling speakers. "Tell him the eastern yard is mine. He can lease the warehouse floor at 20% over market. My people run the loading, my people run the loading, my people run security. He gets access to the line. He doesn't get to plant his own men on my concrete. That's not a starting offer. That's the offer." Andre's throat worked. He turned to Kovacs. Mara's hand, wrapped around the pitcher, went very still for exactly 1 second. She didn't spill a drop, but her pulse slammed once, hard against her ribs. Andre hadn't softened anything. He had rewritten it whole. "Mr. Vale is prepared to negotiate," Andre said in Hungarian. "He suggests a modest fee. He says you may bring your own security quietly." She moved to Dominic, refilling his water. He didn't look up. His eyes were locked on Kovacs. Kovacs smiled, broad and satisfied, and leaned back. "Excellent," he said in Hungarian. "Tell the fool we accept. Once our people are inside, we take the shift schedule within the month." Andre turned back to Dominic, offering a thin, apologetic smile. "Mr. Kovacs says 20% is steep, but he respects your position. He accepts your terms, Mr. Vale. Your people keep security." Dominic's jaw unclenched by a fraction, the smallest, most dangerous kind of relief. He thought he'd won. Mara stepped back into her corner, the picture suddenly very heavy in her grip. Andrei wasn't playing both sides. He was terrified of one of them. Kovacs had gotten to him before tonight, was feeding Dominic a fantasy version of this room, walking him toward an open gate. Once Hungarian muscle was inside the yard, this wouldn't be a negotiation anymore. It would be a massacre with paperwork. And Dominic had no idea. It's not your business, she told herself, shoulders against the wallpaper. You make decent tips and a bad hourly wage. You are 3 months from paying off your sister's hospital bill. You do not get involved with the Vale family. But she looked at him, the quiet dignity of a man trying to hold something together without spilling blood on a Thursday, and something in her chest refused to sit back down. Bring the entrees, the earpiece buzzed. She pushed through the swinging door into the noise and fire of the kitchen, loaded a tray with 3 dry-aged strips and a branzino for Andrei, and walked back down the hallway like she was walking towards something with her name already carved on it. If she said nothing, Dominic signed. If Dominic signed, the Hungarians walked in through his own front gate, and a waitress who understood every word of what had just happened in that room did not get to simply clock out. She pushed the door open with her hip. The mood had shifted, lighter and completely poisonous. Kovacs had ordered brandy and was pouring it himself, ignoring her outstretched hand entirely. The first shipment lands on the 9th, Dominic was saying, cutting into his steak with clean, economical strokes. Payment goes into escrow by the 7th. No escrow, the crates don't leave the boats. Andrei relayed it, then added his own line, sweating through his collar. He says the shipment is on the 9th. He's asking humbly for an advance by the 7th. Kovacs laughed, a big booming sound that made Ruiz's hand drop below the table edge. What's funny? Dominic said. Flat. Not a question. He's complimenting your scheduling, Andrei stammered. It's an expression. Good business. He laughed at my scheduling, Dominic said, voice dropping an octave. The room's temperature fell with it. Kovacs, oblivious to the English currents around him, picked up his wine and said conversationally, in Hungarian, "This soft little man has no idea he's already dead. The moment the gate opens, we clean out his crew and I keep his watch as a souvenir." Mara was standing directly behind him, setting down a dish of charred sprouts. Her breath caught somewhere behind her sternum. This wasn't a hostile takeover. It was a scheduled execution. Andrei turned to Dominic, parchment pale. Kovacs says he looks forward to a long partnership. He's toasting your health. Dominic studied Andrei for a long moment, long enough that Mara felt it in her own spine, then lifted his glass anyway, because a man can only fight the battle he can see. To health, Dominic said quietly. The glasses touched. Mara felt sick to the point of dizziness. She turned to the sideboard so they wouldn't see her face and caught her own reflection in a polished coffee urn. Pale, wide-eyed, dark hair scraped back into a bun that suddenly felt too tight. Say something. Say it now. And what? They draw before he even finishes translating your sentence for him. Dessert list, the earpiece said. Her hands shook, picking up the leather folders. She forced one long breath, held it until the tremor passed, and walked back to the table. Kovacs was still talking, elbows on the cloth. Midnight tomorrow. The warehouse. Tell him to bring only the ugly one. No full escort. More than 2 men. We call it and put him in the street. Andrei scribbled, nodded, turned to Dominic. Mr. Kovacs suggests a walk-through tomorrow at midnight. He asks you keep it small. You and Ruiz, as a gesture of good faith. Dominic chewed slowly, glanced at Ruiz, who gave the faintest shrug. Your call. Midnight. Just me and Ruiz, Dominic said. Good faith. He wiped his mouth, looked from Andrei to Kovacs. Tell him yes. Andrei opened his mouth to hand over the death sentence. Something in Mara finally gave way. It wasn't courage. It was a colder thing. Exhaustion with men in good suits stepping over everyone smaller to get what they wanted. She stepped up on Dominic's left side to clear a bread plate, lifted the pitcher to refill his glass, and looked straight ahead at the wallpaper as she poured. He's rewriting your words, she said. Quiet. Not a whisper for effect. Pitched to travel exactly as far as the table and no farther. Silence dropped like a physical weight. Andrei froze mid-syllable. Dominic didn't flinch, didn't blink. His eyes simply slid from Kovacs to her with the unhurried precision of something that had hunted before. "Say that again," Dominic said. "Calm. Too calm." Kovacs frowned between them. "Mit Mundat?" Mara set the pitcher down with a soft click. She let the server posture fall away and stood up straight. "Your interpreter isn't translating, Mr. Vale," she said. "He's been telling you a different meeting all night." Chairs scraped. In half a second, the room came apart. Kovacs's men rose, hands sliding into their jackets. But Ruiz was already faster, a suppressed pistol level with Kovacs's forehead before either bodyguard cleared leather. Dominic hadn't moved. He kept staring up at Mara, searching her face for the setup, the angle, the con. "Sit down," Dominic said. It wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at the whole room. Nobody moved. "Sit down." Kovacs raised his hands, mock surrendering, and barked something at his men. They eased their hands back out, empty. Andre was hyperventilating. "Mr. Vale, she doesn't understand what she's just a waitress." "Quiet, Andre," Dominic said softly, not looking at him. His eyes stayed on Mara. "You speak Hungarian, and everything he's told me tonight. Almost none of it is what was actually said." She crossed her arms to hide the shaking. "The 20%, he told them you were begging for a small fee and that they could bring their own men in. The laugh wasn't about your scheduling. He said you were soft. He said the moment the gate opens, they clear out your crew and keep your watch as a trophy." The air went thin. Dominic turned his head slow to Andre, who was gripping the table edge hard enough to blanch his knuckles. "They have my sister." Andre choked out, tears standing in his eyes. "They took Ilona 2 days ago. Kovacs said if I didn't get you to agree to the midnight walkthrough, she's dead by morning." Dominic looked at him a long moment, no pity in it, only the cold math of a man who had nearly stepped on something buried. "Is that true?" he asked Mara. "He never mentioned a sister," she said, keeping her voice level. "But when he set the midnight meeting, Kovacs told his men that if you bring more than Ruiz, they cancel the ambush and shoot you in the street instead." Kovacs slammed a fist on the table, switching to blunt, accented English. "You take the word of a waitress, stupid girl who pours water. Vale, you're a clown." Dominic turned from Mara to Kovacs. He moved fast. No wind-up, no warning, and swung the heavy silver pitcher she'd just set down across the side of Kovacs's skull. The big man went down hard, taking his chair and his wineglass with him in a spray of crystal. Before his men could react, Ruiz put 2 rounds through their kneecaps, the suppressed shots barely louder than a stapler, and both went down screaming onto the Persian rug. Andre shrieked and folded himself under the table, sobbing. Mara stood frozen against the sideboard. She'd seen ugliness before, growing up where she had. Not this clean, this fast. The smell of copper and gun oil swallowed the smell of duck fat whole. Dominic straightened, adjusted his cuffs, looked down at Kovacs, groaning on the floor. "Ruiz, tie them off. Call the cleaners." "We're taking Mr. Kovacs to the second warehouse to have a conversation about Andre's sister." "Yes, boss." Dominic turned back to Mara. She was pressed against the sideboard, fingers numb around the edge of it, waiting for the moment his eyes decided she was a loose end instead of a witness who'd just saved his life. He crossed the 2 feet between them and stopped. Close enough that the silver in his hair caught the light. He smelled like cedar and copper. "Mara," he said, reading her name tag. "Not a question." "Yes." "Why did you say anything? You could have let it happen and walked out clean." "I don't care if you live or die, Mr. Vale," she said, and the honesty came out flatter than she meant it to. "I care that a man smiled at you for 20 minutes while he planned to keep your watch as a souvenir. And I really, really hate cleaning blood out of a rug. It never comes out." For a second, nothing. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Barely, but on a face built like a closed door, it registered like an earthquake. He reached into his jacket. Mara flinched. "Open your eyes," he said quiet. She did. He wasn't holding a gun. He held a folded stack of bills, clipped in silver, and set it on the sideboard beside her. "Your shift's over," he said. "Go home. If anyone asks, the Hungarians left early." "I don't want your money." It's not a tip. He was already turning toward Ruiz, who was zip-tying Kovacs's wrists. It's a retainer. Front of the building. 10 minutes. My driver takes you home. You're going to need a new job. And I appear to need an interpreter I can actually trust. He didn't wait for an answer. He hauled Kovacs toward the kitchen exit by the collar, leaving Mara alone in the ruined room with the piano still playing overhead and a stack of money that had just brought her out of one life and into another. The alley behind Ches Solano smelled of wet cardboard and exhaust. Mara stood under the flickering service light, the money clip a cold weight in her coat pocket, watching a black sedan idle with its exhaust curling into the night like a living thing. A man built like a filing cabinet leaned against the rear door, checked her name tag, and opened it without a word. She slid into leather and quiet. For 10 minutes she sat there, turning a hangnail over and over, unsure whether the car was taking her home or somewhere she wouldn't come back from. Then the door opened, and Dominic dropped into the seat beside her, bringing the cold and the smell of blood in with him. His knuckles were split, weeping onto his white cuff. He didn't look rattled. He loosened his tie with 2 fingers and closed his eyes. "Drive," he said. The car pulled off, swallowing potholes. "Where are we going?" Mara asked. Her voice had lost its serving floor polish entirely. "To clear your ledger," he said, eyes still shut. "You mentioned you hate cleaning up blood. I'm guessing you also hate the calls from Sal Petrone." Her stomach dropped through the floor of the car. "How do you know that name?" Sal Petrone ran a loan book out of the back of a laundromat on the east side, and he currently held the $11,000 of debt her brother had run up chasing a bad streak at a card table. Debt that had turned her double shifts into triple shifts and her sleep into nothing at all. Dominic opened his eyes and rolled his head against the seat to look at her. "I don't put strangers in my private rooms, Mara. When you started 6 months ago, Ruiz ran you. Clean record. Vienna for grad school. Came home broke when the program folded, found your brother underwater with Petrone, and took the wine job to keep him breathing." He pulled a phone from his jacket, tapped it twice, held it to his ear. "Sal," he said, all the exhaustion gone from his voice, replaced with something flat and permanent. "It's Dominic Vale." A pause. She could hear the tinny scramble of a voice on the other end. "The boy's debt. I'm taking it off your book, principal and interest both. If you or anyone who works for you comes near his street again or hers, I will have Ruiz make sure you never write another number down. Are we clear?" Another pause. "Good." He hung up and set the phone on the console. Mara couldn't get a breath to catch. 2 years of low-grade terror. Gone, in one phone call, from a man sitting beside her with blood still drying on his hand. "Why?" she said, voice cracking, hating that it did. "You didn't owe me that. What you gave me tonight was already more than enough." He turned to face her fully. "I don't like open debts," he said. "And I don't like my assets distracted." Andre was compromised because Kovacs found the crack in him. Petrone was yours. Now he isn't. My assets. Not a person, a tool, purchased and sharpened. It should have stung. Instead, it landed as something close to relief. In his world, nobody pretended to be anything other than what they were. "I don't know how to live in your world," she admitted, looking at her hands. "I know which fork goes with the fish course. I don't know how to sit across from men like that." He reached over and took her hand, rough, calloused, still faintly rust-colored at the knuckle. "You already did it tonight," he said. "You stood in a room full of loaded guns and took the table away from everyone in it. I have 20 men who can pull a trigger. I don't have anyone who can hear the lie before it lands. I need a wall I can stand behind when the room goes dark." She let go, and her hand kept buzzing where his had been. "Tomorrow noon," he said, looking out at the passing streetlights as the car slowed outside her building. "We meet the Colombians. Wear black. Leave the apron." 3 weeks later, the smell of duck fat had been replaced by diesel and cold salt air. Mara stood on the concrete apron of the eastern rail yard, wind cutting through a wool coat that had shown up at her door 2 days after the shooting. No note attached except one line. "If you're going to stand on cold concrete, you need better armor." Dominic stood beside her, collar up, hands in his pockets. They didn't touch, but they'd started moving like a single unit. Where he went, she went a half step behind and to the left, close enough to catch a whisper. Across the yard stood a broker named Yilmaz, flanked by 3 men who never stopped scanning the perimeter. He was speaking Turkish, close enough in cadence in places that Mara's ear caught fragments. But Dominic had brought a dedicated Turkish interpreter for this meeting, a nervous young man named Colton. "Yilmaz says the tariffs have gone up," Colton said. "He wants an additional 5% on the containers to guarantee safe passage." Dominic didn't look at Colton. He let a long silence sit on the wind first. "My price was locked last month," he finally said. "If he wants to renegotiate, we can unload his containers right here and see how long his fish lasts on my asphalt." Colton translated. Yilmaz's smile thinned. He turned to his men and muttered something sharp in Turkish, then switched to Hungarian. A small, deliberate test, aimed directly at Mara. Word had traveled that Vale's shadow understood more languages than she let on. "This American doesn't bend," Yilmaz muttered in Hungarian. "Give him the old price. Bury the difference in the fuel surcharge. He won't notice." Then, smoothly, back to Turkish for Colton's benefit. He was pleased to honor the original number as a gesture of good faith. Colton relayed it straight. Dominic looked ready to accept, then turned his head a fraction toward Mara. He didn't ask out loud. He never had to anymore. She stepped forward and locked eyes with Yilmaz. "The number stands," she said in flawless Hungarian. "And if it turns up hidden in a fuel surcharge, we'll find it and then we'll find you." The color left Yilmaz's face like water down a drain. His men tensed. Ruiz and the driver, Polly, stepped up beside Dominic, hands resting near their holsters. Dominic didn't understand a word of Hungarian, but he understood fear fluently. He watched Yilmaz fold, hands lifting, stammering an apology in broken English. "No tricks, original price, clean." "See that it stays clean," Dominic said, and turned away, dismissing him entirely. They walked back to the car together, the wind roaring, neither of them feeling it. He opened her door, a habit now, a line he insisted on redrawing every single time between employer and something else. She slid in. "She's something else." He shutting out the cold and pulled 2 crystal glasses and a bottle of something amber from the compartment between the seats. "Fish surcharge," he said, pouring. She laughed despite herself, coughing on the burn of the first sip. "You caught that much?" "I caught that turd." A small, rare smile touched his eyes, the exhaustion still there, but lighter now than it had been the night she met him. "You handled him exactly right." "He was testing you through me," she said. "So I adjusted his math." The humor faded from his face, replaced by something heavier. He turned toward her, closing the distance without quite touching her. "Everyone in my life lies," he said. "For money. For power. To survive one more day. I've spent 20 years waiting for the knife." He reached up, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers resting a moment too long against her pulse. "You handed me the truth in a room full of guns, knowing exactly what it might cost you." "I was tired of being furniture," she said, and meant it more than she expected to. His hand slid to the back of her neck, steady, certain. "You're not furniture anymore," he said. "You're the only thing in that room I actually trust." He didn't close the last inch between them in some dramatic rush. He simply rested his forehead against hers and let out a long breath. A man who spent every waking hour armored, setting the armor down for exactly as long as it took to breathe. Mara closed her eyes and let herself lean into it. She'd traded a server's apron, a constant, grinding fear for bulletproof glass and money with blood still on it. She'd stepped out of a wallpapered corner and directly into a war. And as the car cut through the cold city with Dominic Vale's life resting, quite literally, on what she chose to tell him and what she chose to keep, she understood something she wasn't proud of and wasn't sorry for either. She wouldn't trade it back.